Welcome back to part 2 of the Thursday edition of The Attitude with Arnie Arneson and producers Dave Scott and Stephanie Collins. And again, I want to remind you that we're recording on actually quite a lovely Wednesday in Concord, New Hampshire. It's been years since we started this race class with Jonathan Feingold. You know, I thought it was going to maybe last a year and then last 2 years and then last 3 years. And with each passing month, I realized how important it was that we made this decision. And let me remind you what that decision was. Legislation restricting the teaching of race and racism in public schools and government entities has spread across the country. In an effort to respond, Boston University law professor Jonathan Feingold and Arnie Arneson, the host of The Attitude, are offering Race Class, a once-a-month course conversation where listeners can hear what it's like to approach race and racism from a place of curiosity and history rather than fear and anxiety. In describing the foundational purpose of Race Class, Feingold noted, "We know race matters. Part of this project is to make sense of what that means." So with no further ado, let me welcome Jonathan Feingold back to Race Class, since he is the professor and I am the student. And he mentioned that he would want to talk a little bit about anti-Blackness. And I do need to say something to you the other day. So I do a conservative station every Friday morning. Have been doing it for 25 years, Jonathan, okay? I am the 7 o'clock guest on Friday morning for 25 years. And so we were talking, some conservative guy called in talking about how happy he was about getting rid of the Department of Education. And he said, you realize what the problem is. Ever since we created the Department of Education, the quality of public education has gone down. That they're teaching more and more things that are socialist and communist and all this other stuff. And look what they're doing when they talk about our history. I mean, they're bringing things in like CRT into the classroom. And he goes on and on and on. Every single thing he said was a distortion and a lie. Every single thing he said. But of course, it's part of the script. And the script that we know, whether you're watching Fox or coming out of Trump or watching whenever one of those MAGA silos is that they've heard it so many times that it spills forth and they connect the dots in every negative way. And what was so interesting is that both the host and myself were trying to tell him it's not true, but you can't even use those words anymore. Because saying that you're spreading a falsehood doesn't seem to make sense when we're seeing not only the destruction of public education, but we're seeing, you mentioned anti-Blackness. I'm seeing what's happening to everything that relates to the history of this country. And I woke up this morning and I said, wow, I wonder if the South won. Took a while, but with this sort of appearance of Donald Trump and what he's done with Project 2025 and the people he's appointed, it's kind of like the Confederate wet dream. Everything they wanted. The only people that matter are men and men that are white. Anyway, welcome back to the program, and let's talk about anti-Blackness and wherever else you would like to take this conversation.
Thanks, Arnie. So I woke up this morning early. I wake up too early most mornings because there's too much to do. And I learned that a Tufts grad student had been abducted by federal immigration officials last night while headed to an iftar dinner with friends in Somerville, which is the town that I live in Tufts, the town next door. And it sounds like the thing that the student did that got them targeted was to write an op-ed in the Tufts student newspaper last year that was criticizing the university president with respect to how the university was engaging students on student activism to divest from Israel. And, it's now the student is among a growing number of our students who for engaging in the most legitimate, discourse that could happen on a university campus, they're being targeted by an unaccountable police force. They're being taken and, you know, um, as part of a much broader agenda to literally take out folks who will dissent from the administration. And I just um, and Tufts, like what I've seen so far, maybe it's changed, is that there was an email that came out from Tufts president, I believe, sort of ex announcing what happened, explaining and mentioning that Tufts had not cooperated with federal uh, immigration enforcement, which is great if it's true. But I saw no rage in that letter. I saw no commitment to do everything in Tufts' power to bring their student home. Um,
Wow.
and I guess I just start there because it is really important, I think, just to make really clear that one of the things that's under attack is our very ability to speak, to use
Yeah.
words,
Yeah.
to engage in language that threatens this administration. So much so that they're locking up our students. And it is, of course, not going to end with our students. And it's, of course, not going to end with students or others who are uh, engaged in advocacy for Palestinians. This is the tip of the spear of a much broader effort to neutralize political opposition. And we continue to not see the necessary level of urgency from most of our leaders, whether it be in Congress or within universities. And so we'll shift now to it's like more of the conversation, but I just had to start there.
Well, but so now we have no idea what is going to invite ICE or the administration to round us up. Is it because you were involved in a protest? Maybe. Is it because you write an op-ed in the Tufts paper? Maybe. Is it because you are a person of color? Maybe. Is it because you have tattoos? Maybe. Think about all the little check boxes. So you don't, the chilling nature of this conversation is overwhelming, Jonathan, because what they are doing by their selective rounding up of these individuals for all these varied reasons that aren't about violence or crime or all those things. Remember, he ran on, which was one of the reasons why he was going to round these people up and detain them or have them make them disappear, was that they had done something criminal or they had done something violent or they had some. This isn't true of what you just described with that tough student. They wrote
And
an article in a paper. They wrote,
we
and,
are
and that was a trigger.
we are these people.
Yeah, we are
There's
the,
like
thank you.
we are these people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, and so this and one of the things that has been targeted by Trump allied Trump and allies like those at the Heritage Foundation um, and elsewhere is critical race theory. It's now 4 years, 4.5 years since the initial Trump executive order um, targeting critical race theory, and something that is true but incomplete is the recognition that from the beginning, CRT was not targeted by GOP politicians because they knew anything about this thing called critical race theory. Most had never heard of it. And so, in a sense, it was meant to be a boogeyman, to rile up a base, to, um, create distrust between parents and their schools, part of a broader sort of strategy to sort of split um, coalition, but it was also always targeted because it is valuable,
Yes.
because
Yes.
the knowledge and the concepts that are contained with it are valuable. The reason why the Trump administration doesn't want people to learn about slavery in the United States or backlash to the civil rights movement or like who is being memorialized in Confederate monuments is because that knowledge is valuable.
Right.
Not because, it's divisive or indoctrinating or whatever sort of nonsense character. It's because it is power. And so I just think about this with myself. And so for the rest of our show today, I'm going to do something that I'm actually somewhat disinclined to do, which is to share some half-baked analysis. I'd much prefer to have a sort of fully fleshed out, sort of clean, precise set of ideas, but I don't have those right now because everything is moving so quickly. But what I want to talk about is so how Trump, as one thing that he is very good at, is telling stories.
Mm-hmm. He is.
Rarely are those stories tethered to reality, but that doesn't matter because effective storytelling shapes our reality. It shapes our perception of reality, it shapes our actions, it shapes our attitudes. And something that he is as good at as everyone is storytelling. And he also, to his credit, has like a deep intuitive sense about racial dynamics in the United States. He's not, sophisticated in any particular sense, but he understands what is beneath the surface and how he can use that for a political edge. And because he plays, with race all the time. And right now, I want to talk about like two things that I think have been uh, problematically sort of divorced from one another in our public conversations, in our analysis, but how Trump mobilizes anti-blackness for political gain and how he mobilizes anti-Semitism for
Yes.
political gain. Um, and again, where I'm going to go now, it's it's half baked, but I think it's and in a sense, it's just sort of me sort of openly sharing with you how I am beginning to fit this together, um, because the stories that Trump is telling us as to why he has to wreck democracy are stories that are trading on like anti-blackness on the one hand, and anti-Semitism on the other. And so we'll work through this a little bit.
So I was just thinking
Yeah.
about something. So I'm trying to think of the stereotype that he plays into with this anti-blackness and this anti-Jewishness, all right, the anti-Semitism. And it plays to a stereotype. The black is taking your job and the Jew is taking your wealth. Think about this. Think about this. What have we always talked about? The money changers, the people who, basically run the banks, run the financial world. When you look at it and you see this grotesque inequality and the fact that, where has your wealth gone? And so, you can then go into the stereotype of the Jew and place them there. And then when you look at what's happening to your jobs, do you have a good job? Who's taken that job away? Who's now on the bench that wasn't on the bench before? Who's pushed you off the bench? Then it becomes the other. And the most prevalent other is either a female or a black. Okay? Those are the two others that you see as your competition. So in a lot of ways, it's those historical stereotypes at a time of grotesque inequality, at a time where we've sort of tried to come out of a pandemic, where we see the cost of everything going up and no one seeming to be able to come to a rescue. You have to focus the blame. And not only is his storytelling effective, Jonathan, but he knows exactly how to pivot and place the blame on the back of those two groups.
So, and so we've talked about multiple times. So like when it comes to race, often in the United States, we have this very flat sensibility of what this thing is we're talking about, just some category that you're in or you're not. Um, and if we want to have just a much sort of like broader, full conversation about race, we have to recognize that so these categories have always been tools. They
Yes.
have like in part because of the meanings that get embedded within them. And oftentimes, historically, now, certainly, sort of racial identity can be something that is mobilized for solidarity. to bring people together, to sort of protect allied groups. But historically in the United States, racial identity is, um, or sort of stories about race, um, just the existence of these groups, what the folks in these groups like, who they are, how they relate to us. It has been a historical tool to concentrate power. And so, like, when you talk about how Trump is blaming these other groups for the insecurity that everyday people have, for the cost of, like, healthcare, tuition, eggs, he's also distracting from the way in which a very small number of billionaires, the tech bros, whatever the bros are, um, how they are systematically structuring society so that for almost everyone in the United States, you have to hustle from the moment you get up to when you go to bed just to get by, regardless of what your salary is, unless you are in this like super high echelon. And we're picking fights with each other. We are not collectively, directing, I mean, increasingly against Tesla, which is actually great, and Musk. Like there is like something nice there. But like part of the goal is to distract us so that we are like looking inwards as opposed to looking up at the oligarchical forces that are just, messing with our lives. But so moving through quickly, so Trump, like you said, he like, and this, like, if you listen to Tim Snyder, he'll tell you, or Jason Stanley, that so fascists they need an us versus them mentality. They need people to understand the world as us, on the one hand, and then everyone else them, with which is very zero sum, and it's all about winning. And now winning, in the US context, it's like, okay, winning is good, but winning means defeating the other. And so like the own the lib sort of stuff, like Trump is part of a much longer movement in the United States to um just entrench this sort of, sensibility that for us to be okay, they have to suffer. Which is why even if the GOP gets rid of like Medicaid, cut Social Security, there will likely be people who you're like, all right, I'll sacrifice 10 years of my life so long as I can own them. Now, there's nothing inherent about that. That is the product of disciplined storytelling. And part of like the us versus them that Trump is leaning into is it's so it is like in sort of his political sort of like intuitive sensibilities. He understands that anti-blackness is actually like deeply pervasive within the sort of DNA of the United States. And that anti-blackness has always in part been about defining whiteness. And so if you
Yes,
just look
great
at
line.
so many of the policies, there like you can like have like a screen like what's it called? Like screen or like screen comparison or whatever, like a side by side. I mean, so I'm just gonna list a few, and this I got from so African American Policy Forum. They put out some good work on this. So Trump is simultaneously um, doing like going after any sort of policy or practice that helps Black Americans actually sort of live with dignity in the United States, while then, essentially promoting sort of like, just basically a white supremacist viewpoint. Okay, so a few things. So um, Trump shut down a national database that was tracking police misconduct, pardoned police officers that had been convicted for murdering unarmed Black men. He fired, as we all know, C.Q. Brown Jr., the four-star Air Force general, second Black chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And we know he went after him because he was Black. And like within that was this narrative that he like somehow didn't deserve it. So who's he hire for that? Our boy Pete Hegseth, our signal guy.
Right.
Like, and what's he do? What does Trump do? He halts over 3,000 Department of Education civil rights investigations related to racial discrimination. What's he do at the same time? He has a new priority to investigate quote unquote discrimination against white students. Uh, what does he do on one side? He dismantles Black Lives Matter Plaza in DC. He's explicitly he is directly trying to take down public symbols that affirm the value of Black life while reinstating military base names that are like chosen to honor traitors, Confederate generals. And so it's like there's just this like split screen that like we are seeing where there is like direct attack on blackness and an uplifting of whiteness. Um,
So Stephanie sent me this article, and I want to bring it up until like yesterday. Okay, this is from a site that she follows, space.com. I have to admit, Jonathan, I'm not a follower of space.com, but I'm grateful that Stephanie is. Here is what the headline: NASA says removal of first woman person of color language from the Artemis website does not indicate moon mission crew change. It's important to note that the change in language does not indicate a change in the crew assignments. So instead of identifying who's in the crew, they have now decided that that is going to be something that is not going to be shared because one of the main characters in the crew is not only a female, but a female of color. And yet they listen to they turn themselves into a pretzel. Nothing has changed in the crew, except we can't tell you who's in the crew. Because if we tell you who's in the crew, we'll have to mention female and we'll have to mention black. And therefore, we're not allowed to do that. So therefore, they technically don't exist, but despite the fact that they do exist. I mean, Jonathan, this is bizarre on every level. It isn't about changing history. It's about even looking at a photo of a crew and saying we can't acknowledge what you are seeing, although this is the crew. I mean, it's
and
like
it,
January 6th. It's the same kind of
but
thing.
but it's not bizarre. Like
Oh,
this is it is by design.
I
And
know.
I don't want anyone to sort of misunderstand me as like suggesting that only people who are racialized as black in the United States are under attack. Now, everyone is under attack. But what
Yes.
Trump is doing is he's tapping into this sort of racial logic that we have in the United States, that is sort of this racial common sense, that sort of views the world often in um, sort of black-white terms and is trading on pernicious anti-black stereotypes. All the language about merit, like that is all just like coded language to suggest that no person of color, no woman, and certainly not black women who are in the positions that they hold deserve it.
Yeah.
And you have like folks in the Trump administration that explicitly saying what we need are more white guys here. Well, and obviously this is absurd. Um, the like the Signal Atlantic stuff, like you don't need any better evidence that a room full of unqualified like white guys who just get sort of nepotistically appointed are gonna, I can't use like the language I want to use, but F everything up. Um,
Right.
but Trump is able to mobilize that because anti-black racism is so pervasive. Because, and so like, this gets back into past conversations we have, because even liberal defenders of affirmative action have consistently failed to defend taking race into account as a anti-discrimination to counter all of the ways in which anti-black racism differentially positions people in the United States.
You
And
mentioned anti-Semitism. Please, you
yeah,
wanted to
so we
thread
got
that.
it.
Yeah, we only
Yeah,
have
so we
three
got to
minutes
thread
left.
this
Thread
needle.
that.
So
Yes,
yeah, so
please.
so Trump, he's telling two stories that are actually interweaving. One is this like story that is sort of, whether it's explicit or not, it's deeply sort of animated by anti-black racism. He is also using anti-Semitism in an like equally pernicious sorts of way. So what is he doing? He's essentially trying to engage in these like mob-like shakedowns of universities. He's literally abducting students in the middle of the night, trying to expel them from the country. And why? Like, what is the story he's telling? He's telling us that he is doing this because those people, quote unquote, are harassing Jewish students so that he can, quote unquote, combat anti-Semitism because, you know, the um, folks like Mahmoud Khalil, who led a sort of a Gaza solidarity protest at
Colombia.
Colombia, are, quote unquote, pro-Hamas terrorists. And we know he's going after pro-Palestinian advocates because they are less um, less insulated from attack, because they're actually disfavored even on sort of flanks of the left, in order to like as this tip of the spear to get in. And we also know he doesn't care about Jews. He like we know that he platform like like Musk's Nazi salutes, all like the like JD Vance's support for Germany's Nazi party. There's just white nationalists and anti-Semitic individuals that litter Trump's administration. But that's almost beside the point. He is telling another story. He is telling our country that he is demolishing democracy for the Jews.
Yeah.
He is making
Wow.
he is making Jews the scapegoat for all of it, for the violence, for the decimation. Um, and that's like if you want a script of how like Jewish identity is weaponized by political forces, that is your script.
Wow.
And it's not to say that Jewish students have been like experienced discomfort or uncomfortable, or that Jewish identifying organizations like the ADL aren't in lockstep with Trump in the most sort of grotesque ways right now. But he's telling us a story. He's like, I'm cracking down on you and your students and your professors and your friends and your institution. Oh, for who? Not for me, for Jewish students, which is intended to split coalitions. It's supposed to make it harder for sort of Ashkenazi Jews, Jews who would be racialized as white, to actually act in coalition with their black allies. Because he is saying that he's taking DEI down for us.
Right.
Like it's about division, it's about resentment, and ultimately it's about scapegoats.
You got to write that piece of the conversation. Just do me a favor. Write. If it is the last Thursday of the month, it must be race class with Jonathan Feingold. And now you know why Jonathan said, we know race matters. Part of this project is to make sense of what that means. Thank you for helping us find that definition. And we'll talk again in a month. Thank you so much, Jonathan.
Thanks, Arnie.